Welcome to the Learning Can't Wait podcast, a Full Mind production. At Full Mind, our vision is to ensure every child has access to an exceptional education. Each episode, we will be joined by pathfinders within and around the education space who are bringing about transformational change on behalf of deserving students. I am your host, Hayley Spira-Bauer. Welcome back, everybody, to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. We have a fan favorite, not just a hostess favorite, but a fan favorite back with us today. We have PJ Caposey, the superintendent of Oregon 220 and Meridian 223 in Illinois. You heard me right, 2 districts. Welcome back, PJ.
Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
PJ, are you sleeping these days?
Well, when the head hits the pillow, I am sleeping very, very well.
I bet. Do you wear one of those Oura rings that tells you about your sleep every day, or do you not need it anymore?
Well, no, I used to wear, what was the watch one? Like it was the strap that was real popular like 4 years ago during COVID. But then I started obsessing over it, and it actually became quite unhealthy for me. So no, I do not.
Okay, but probably for the best.
Yes.
Probably for the best.
Yes.
Well, given that you are a busy person and you have a lot going on between your 2 districts that you are currently leading, I thought it would be good to just jump right in. Does that sound good to you?
Amazing.
All right. So PJ, you've already answered all my questions in your first appearance on the podcast with some really great fellow guests. So I'm going to dive right into the topic at hand. Your episode is part of our funding mini series. It's going to go live very shortly for a reason. We are into 2025 amidst a very uncertain federal fiscal environment that is trickling down to our states and local levels. And vendors, school leaders, nonprofits, they all kind of are up in arms about what's coming down the pipeline. So I want you just to describe from your vantage point over in Illinois how you would describe the current K-12 funding landscape.
Well, the same way that people describe the housing bubble that was about to implode in the early aughts, we're in a really bad shape in Illinois. And I don't feel like enough people are talking about it. Actually, been writing an article on it, but haven't quite got it to publish at this point. But we're in a bad spot.
Tell me why you specifically name Illinois being in a particularly bad spot, because I think this is both a federal and a local conversation. So what factors are making it particularly challenging for Illinois?
So Illinois is among, if not the most property tax dependent state on school funding. And so what we've had over the last 5 to 7 years is almost unprecedented growth in property tax. The term that we use is EAV, which is equalized assessed valuation for those that don't live in superintendent business manager world. That is what we look. So EAV has had this unprecedented rise. The issue is that with that, so too have every expense. So in my district currently, we've had about a 32% EAV rise over 5 years, which is crazy to think about, that we're getting a third more money from our primary revenue source. But teacher salaries have gone up 36% in the same time. Support staff has gone up 42%, and insurance has gone up 30%. So actually, we're in a worse position despite the best financial conditions we have ever had in the state of Illinois. Now, districts that are less dependent on residential property are a little bit safer. And this because commercial property tends to not be as volatile. But in districts that are small town or rural, we're in a really, really dangerous position, because on top of that, you throw on the fact that we have a teacher shortage in Illinois, particularly again in small town rural areas. So what do we do to combat the teacher shortage? Well, we pay our existing teachers better to try to retain them. And then we throw all of these incentives out. All of it costs. And so we're spending more and more and more. And the increase that we're seeing in EAV is just not sustainable. And so we are in a really precarious position, I think, 4 to 8 years out. Like, it's not tomorrow, right? But around the corner, it's a pretty dangerous spot.
How are you preparing for that?
So it's interesting. So collaboratively, I guess. So what I'm challenging my board to do is we have to have a strategy. So the good news is that in both of my districts, we've worked really hard to be fiscally responsible, and we've got a lot of money in the bank, right? And so the term that I use in my board often is a runway. So we've got this long runway. So, and I've got probably 10, 11, 12 years left in my career in Illinois before I go do the retirement double dip thing that people do. I could maybe even run out those years, right? Like, I mean, so like it's not a tomorrow issue, but it's definitely a strategy issue. And so for me, I'm trying to walk my board through like there's really two ways that solve this. One is we do less for kids, we reduce programming and we reduce staff, or we increase taxes. Those are really our two sustainable ways out of the problem that's emerging. And nobody likes either one of those two options, right? So it's a lot of times it becomes, all right, punt one more year, deficit spend one more year, and we'll see if something changes with the state or new influx of money like ESSER or whatever comes through and we can offset expenses. But we're in a pretty dangerous spot, I think, in Illinois and small rural. And again, we're not going to feel it for a few years, but it's just things are escalating at a rate that are not sustainable. And we, even with that escalation, aren't attracting new teachers. So it's not even even that solution isn't really solving the problem.
A lot of what you named here is specifically local to Illinois and to your own districts. How are you thinking about the federal policy changes, and what would you advocate for to help stabilize funding for public schools?
So when I think of the federal side, I'm curious more than anything else, right? Because we haven't really heard specifics on anything. So there is a world in which nothing really changes except how the money flows through. And then there's a world where it could be catastrophic for many districts. Now, my districts are under 5% federally dependent. And so again, we could survive, right? We'd be all right.
I think that's such an important point. Can I just like pause you for one sec, PJ? Because I had Rita Fernandito on from Penn GSC. She's a funder, whatever. She does all this work around financing, and she specifically called it out. I don't think everybody realizes that most schools are not extremely dependent on federal funds for their regular operations. They have a percentage of their budget, which amounts to millions in many cases, depending on the size of the district. And yet it's fractional, it's a small fractional amount. So I just want to pause for a second and call that out, because I do think there's maybe some confusion around that. It does impact other aspects of school operations, but I think it's an important note.
100%. But the thing that I always add as a caveat to that is it's usually our most traditionally underserved kids that are most impacted by federal dollars. And so not serving those kids isn't really a choice. So if the federal dollars go away, then it's just going to be supplanted by the local dollars, which means that there's going to be a shortfall somewhere else. So it's like I am curious, just simply from the standpoint of I have some colleagues that just don't care yet. I have some colleagues that are in a full, panic about it. And so I am just very curious, because if all title and IDA money just starts to flow through Health and Human Services, then for the most part, we're pretty substantially the same. Now, even if everything just flows through in terms of title monies and IDA monies, like there's still a lot of competitive grants that the Department of Ed has housed for years that have allowed for innovation, that have allowed for creativity, that have allowed for additional services and programming. And there's no mention as to what that might look like, right? So there's probably going to be loss in this, no matter how it happens. I just don't know. I'm curious as to what the plan is, because like I'm pretty plugged in. I haven't seen a plan, right? Like, so if I haven't seen it, I assume most people haven't. I'm sure there is one, right? Like I'm not saying there isn't. It's just not out there in really any circle that I'm aware of at this point.
Yeah, it's not publicly available information. Okay, so you named two things that I think are really important, which my next question was going to be about equity, and how we serve all learners, particularly our most vulnerable, with all of these changes. So you called out that, yes, it's only 5% of our budget, and that 5% typically impacts our most vulnerable populations, our students with disabilities, our multilingual learners. How do you as a school leader protect those students? Is it what you said? Is it as simple as what you said, that you turn to the local funding to make up for that? You apply for grants? Is there more to it?
Sure, there will eventually be more to it, right? Like if it becomes kind of a crisis situation. But for the most part, no. Like it is, we will just figure it out for those kids. Not necessarily first, but also pretty much first, right? Like, and then you build around it. So it's the same way. Like, if anyone's ever worked in a junior high, high school, when you build a master schedule, you build around your populations that are special first, when that might be whether it's your advanced and gifted kids or your special needs kids or your multi-language kids. You build around that and do everything else. The budget's not really any different with
Sure.
that. It's not like all of a sudden we're gonna be like, oh yeah, we're just not gonna do FAPE, right? Like no, the kid is still gonna get access to what the public education they need, but that might mean now we're going from 21 in kinder to 24 because now we have to pull a teacher from here to there to make it work, right? So that's what people I think kind of miss in translation is that we can cover these gaps. It just means less direct service to the collective whole. So anytime that we're doing any type of reduction in expenditure, that means it's just going to be less services. Now, in some cases, like in particular, like even with some ESSER money, we added some services that didn't show any ROI. So not every service that you don't offer anymore is catastrophic, but it is by definition less services,
Right.
and so that's something that I think the public at large, and particularly teachers, like I don't think we do a very good job as superintendents helping teachers understand this scope at all. And my perspective on that comes from I teach grad school, right, and so I teach finance to lots of really well-intentioned teachers who want to become administrators, and there is no base level of knowledge, right? And so it is literally 101 stuff to get them started so that we can get into more complex stuff so I can teach the class. And so the overall education on this is so slight right now.
That's why we're doing this mini series because I do think there's so much ambiguity that everyone's kind of talking in circles. And if I've taken anything out of the conversations that I've been having for the mini series, it's that we have to just be slow and methodical and think about the future, not just this moment, because the impact, like you said, is coming. You mentioned briefly that as in talking to your colleagues, some folks are not concerned about it right now. Is that the largest general sentiment? Like, what are you picking up from your peers in Illinois and around the country as you talk to them about their approaches upcoming?
I would say that there's somewhere between anxiety and excitement, right? There's some people that really think that the Department of Ed maybe doesn't serve this huge purpose, and that it's going to be more local control at in the truest sense if this happens. So there's excitement, there's anxiety, there's some people that the job's hard and other stuff's happening. And so it's like when it's important, I'll know. And until then, I'm just going to keep trying to improve reading scores, right? Which I'm not faulting somebody for doing that, but it's people have different levels of intrigue and concern on this because, quite frankly, I mean, I know, again, like you, we know a lot of people. Nobody really has any influence over this, right? Like, so, like, we don't. It's the old Covey like circle of influence thing. We're not really in the circle of influence on this decision, so might as well just kind of chill out until it comes out, and then we'll figure out what's going on after that.
Do either of your districts pursue revenue generating opportunities such as like facility rentals or partnerships with local businesses to like source for alternative funding models? I've been hearing a little bit about that recently as well.
Yeah, I mean, we take advantage of any revenue generation that we can. I mean, we even own farmland and lease it, right? I mean, so we take advantage of any revenue generating opportunity we can. It just all becomes like in total in a good year, you maybe get like you pay for two teachers, right? So it's not changing the trajectory of your district,
Sure.
but you are stopgapping, right? So right now in Oregon, we're shopping banks because our scoreboard broke and I need someone to pay for a scoreboard. And so part of that, instead of wanting to pay for the scoreboard, I'm trying to see which bank, if we take our business there, will buy us a new scoreboard, right? Like, so we're always looking for different ways to offset expenditures. But none of them like there's a district I read about, and I'm not sure where it was at, but like they went way down the road back in the day of mining their own Bitcoin. Like that would have been a self-sustaining prophecy, right? Like that would have worked out good. Most of the revenue generating things that districts do aren't mining Bitcoin. So we're basically again trying to find a teacher to salary if we get it right.
Oh my gosh, I just quickly Googled that. One of the things that I just found when I Googled it as you're speaking was about the town doing it illegally in the state and the space under, this is probably not what you're talking about, but in the space under a school in Massachusetts. That's probably not what you were talking about, but that also is fascinating. PJ, I'm talking to you and we're going so rapid fire through these questions that like the listeners are getting a real education here from you. And I'm going to change course again to something you mentioned like 3 questions ago, which is that you talked a little bit about ESSER funds and them drying up and not everything showed ROI. So I'm curious about what data you are paying attention to from that dried up ESSER funds and what really lasted that you tried out during the pandemic that really made an impact on the community that you serve.
So in the 2 districts, they took dramatically different approaches with the ESSER dollars, which is kind of interesting because I'm kind of living a case study, 2 case studies, n size of 1. So not necessarily that you can draw massive conclusions, but in the district in Oregon, where I'm sitting right now, they essentially banked every ESSER dollar they could use. They essentially used it, the money that came in, they paid existing things off and did whatever, which, to go back to what I talked about before, has given us the runway. So now if things get bad, the 4 or 5 years that got bought was essentially bought with ESSER dollars back in the day. So, and that was before I got here. So that's like, thank you to my predecessor for giving me and he did that intentionally, right? Like that was a thoughtful move on his part, as he knew he was entering retirement. He wanted to leave it better than he found it. So shout out Tom Mahoney. In Meridian, we attacked things, right? Like we went after things that we didn't know. I mean, the thing that probably has had the greatest ROI is that we added, and this is something that like I even wrote articles saying this is probably not the best use of, because of adding personnel, because then at some point you have to cut personnel. But the actual human counselors we added had the most profound impact on what we do. It decreased our referrals, it increased our retention, so everything has gone better with the human support. And then we also added some automated SEL supports that worked quite well as well. In terms of everything else that we added or supplemented, like there were some that had ROI and there were some that had limited ROI, but like one of the things that we do in our district intentionally is like when we purchase something, like we say, this is how we're going to measure effectiveness of it, as opposed to just being like, yeah, we're just going to add stuff and maybe it'll work.
Let's find out.
Right.
Yeah.
Like no other business works that way. So in schools, we often forgive ourselves the responsibility of measuring return on investment. Now, when you have 37 levers you pulled at once, it is really hard to tease out what that looks like. But there are ways, and not everything is student achievement, right? Like some cases it was just use, right? So like one of the cottage industries that boomed and then kind of collectively failed with ESSER money was 24/7 online tutoring.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I mean, some are still successful, but I'm saying overall there's this huge spike and then fall. For us, like that wasn't about test scores for us. That was just usage, right?
Mm-hmm.
And it was what I actually said with ROI is like we will know at the end of this contract if we are to extinguish the contract and people revolt, it worked. And if we are going to extinguish the contract and nobody cares, it didn't work. That's the ROI measurement we're using. So like I am not talking sophisticated data schema at that point, but we talked about it up front, and that's what we knew we were going to measure based on.
It's funny you say that. And I think that's so important. I was talking about this exact topic on a podcast the other day that I was a guest on. If you are purchasing products and your vendor is not saying to you, what outcomes are you expecting? You should probably walk the other way. So cool to hear the other side of the coin, because that is absolutely aligned with how I think we all should be approaching the work that we do. I just want to pause for a moment on the important point you made about purchasing or investing in school counselors to support the mental health needs of your students. I mean, our students are more depressed and anxious than ever, more suicidality than ever before. This has repercussions not just on how they perform in school, but also on their longitudinal success. Very cool that that's where you spent your money over at Meridian. Also very cool how Oregon spent its money. And one may have more financial implications immediately obvious, but the other one has probably really long lasting effects on children's lives. So I respect both decisions deeply.
It was an interesting time. I have one other thing that I want to bring up in terms of that I think is getting lost a little bit in all this financial stuff.
Please.
I think superintendents are about to make an absolute boatload of money. Not that we don't already make decent money, but the superintendent shortage is dramatically underreported on right now.
Yeah.
I just did some consulting for a county that had 3 open superintendencies and had 1 applicant for all 3.
Wow.
I just did some work for another district who historically is a very high performing district, both academically and athletically, which you can say what you want to about it, but an athletically high performing district matters. And they had 3 applicants. It is in the district I'm leaving, Meridian, they interviewed 6 candidates. Of the 6, 5 already have superintendencies. So there's a supply and demand issue happening with superintendencies. And when this bubble bursts and you have to lay off your friends and make tough decisions, even less people are going to want the job.
Mm.
So I think it's going to be this really interesting thing because when we said that there's not this education, part of it is mistrust.
Mm.
And what is going to, like, my projection is what's going to happen is soup salaries are going to escalate quickly while we're also reducing staff, and people aren't going to be able to wrap their brains around it. And that is going to be the nature of the marketplace. And I just don't see a scenario where that doesn't happen based on supply and demand. So it's really an interesting time, and I don't think we're having enough conversation around what that actually looks like and how it manifests. Because if the economy goes down at all, like one of the things that I tease my suburban friends about all the time is in there nobody cares about what they make because they're not a 1% earner. Now I have buddies that are 45 miles away without necessarily great resumes making double my salary, and nobody cares.
Mm-hmm.
But people really care about mine because I'm a 1% earner in my town. What does that look like when we have 30 kids in a classroom and my salary keeps going up? Like, how is society kind of going to grapple with that? And I really think we're on the precipice of that, and no one's having that conversation.
That is a good question and a really good call out, PJ, that I haven't heard yet in this dialogue. I'm grateful for it. I'm curious, like, how do you think this plays out? So the salaries increase while we're having to maybe increase class sizes and cut extracurriculars and all these other components. What happens next?
So it depends. Like, what? It depends on. So this goes back to federal politics. If it becomes much more of a voucher system, then it becomes a competitive marketplace, right? And then those that are bringing in kids to their district, money's following kids. Like, there's all kinds of different ways that it can play, and there's a million dominoes. So I'm not exactly sure how it goes, but I do think what is going to continue to happen is, like, so for me, I've had the opportunity to go to lots of districts throughout the country. I've chosen to be where where I've raised my kids, and I've chosen that because this is where I want to be. It may become so uncomfortable to be there that what will happen is the haves will continue to get richer, which means high quality soups will go to the suburban areas where nobody cares about what the salary is making, and the EAV is stable, or the property values are stable because they're commercial and not, and then all of your small rural, I think, could be in real trouble. And again, like, there's organizations like National Rural Educator Association, but I think rural small town education in the next decade, particularly in property tax dependent states, all right, it's going to be rough.
Whew. So PJ, I have my final question for you here. What is the biggest misconception about school funding, given that you say we need more education? The biggest misconception about school funding that you wish more people understood?
I think it shifts from district to district. Well, let me just start. I'll start at the very simple. This is what I literally am teaching on tonight for my grad school class, is that we can't do more without more taxes. Like, and I know that sounds dramatically oversimplified, but schools run let me change that. Public schools run on tax, and whether that's tax that comes to the state and flows back down, or that's local property tax. So we can't say we need to do more without somehow having more, which means more tax, which is, I know, a dramatic oversimplification, but people don't get it, right? So people are literally running for school board all over the place on more programs, less taxes. How? Like it, we are one of the few industries that our level of success does not influence our level of revenue. Now, if you're in a voucher state or a state where the money follows the kid, then sure, maybe it does. But in Illinois, I'll say for this, like quite literally, the worse you perform, the more money you get, because then additional money flows to you to provide support. And so I'll look at a district, similar size, similar demographics, we're performing here, they're performing there, they get more money. And now it makes sense why the money flows there, but that just is what it is. So people, I think there's a massive misconception as to you perform well, you get more money. Nope. The only way that you get more money is to increase taxes. Like the bottom line is the bottom line is the bottom line. And if we start there, then I think we can have an educated conversation about what services we want to provide to kids.
PJ Caposey, as always, this has been an enlightening conversation, and you kept up with my New York rapid style pace. Thank you so much for coming back to the Learning Can't Wait podcast and sharing your thoughts, your ideas, your predictions about the current funding environment for schools.
I wish it was a little bit more upbeat and positive.
Listen, sometimes the reality isn't pretty, and you have to be really wide-eyed about it, which is why we're having this conversation.
Thanks for having it, and thanks for leading it and starting the conversation.
Yeah, of course. Thanks everybody for tuning in today. Thanks for listening to the Learning Can't Wait podcast. If you like what you heard, please rate, review, and share this episode. Be the first to know when we have a new episode by subscribing wherever you listen to podcasts. If you'd like to be a guest on the show or have a suggestion for an episode, email us at podcast@fullmindlearning.com.